Hello everyone, welcome back to lecture 4 part 4, scripts. Now, when you hear scripts, the first thing you think of is this huge block of code that has a bunch of different or random letters that you don't understand. But when it comes to Highrise, it's a bit different because we use the Highrise API that has specific methods or functions that you can use to create something out of it. It's more like a simplified version. We don't use C# to create games. We use Lua, which is a language which is a very easy to understand language. Not very easy, but it's not overwhelming. It's not complex like other languages. It has a bunch of different variables, a bunch of different types and attributes and data structure, but it's going to be easier than you think if you want to start learning it, okay? Now, in this lecture, we're not going to cover everything or in an advanced way. It's just going to be a very basic lecture to just teach you how to create a Lua script, how to attach this script to any game object to make the game object do something. Now, in here, we have a bunch of different examples. We have this written guide that you can follow, and you can just copy this code and paste it in the code editor, and you're good to go to just start testing your first script. Now, before we get started, before we go to Unity, just make sure that you have Visual Studio Code installed. To make sure that you have Visual Studio Code installed, you can go to Google Chrome and you can type Visual Studio Code, code install, or you can just do VS Code install. It's the first link. You go here and you click on download if you're on Windows, or if you're on Mac, you click download on Mac. You just follow the normal steps of downloading any application. Now, that being said, let's head back to Unity and start creating our first script. Now, in Unity, to create the first script, first I like to create a folder called scripts to keep all my scripts organized in that folder. So we go to the project panel, assets, and then we right click, create folder, and we call this scripts. I'm going to open scripts by double clicking on the folder, and I'm going to right click, create Lua, and here all of these are scripts, but each script has a different type. We're not going to cover all the types yet. This is going to be in more advanced lecture, but just to give you a quick overview, each script has a different purpose. They all do different stuff. For example, the client basically is the player that's playing the game. The server is what's happening behind the scenes. So for example, that connects everything. It's like the base for everything. And then there's the UI, which is the user interface, client and server, which connects both of them. We are going to explain this later, but let's first start with the client because we don't want to have something multiplayer right now. It's just going to be very basic, okay? So click on client and give this script any name. So for example, I'm going to call this my first script and hit enter and wait for it to reload. Now that we have our script created, we have to open it using a visual or code editor. That's why we installed Visual Studio earlier. So to open it, just double click on my first script, and this will open up in Visual Studio. You can see here that it opens the entire project, and this is good. That's how you're going to be working with scripts. It's going to open the entire project for you, so you can type your code here. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and type everything one by one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the documentation page that I just showed you, which is lecture 4 part 4. And I'm going to scroll down to find this example for the basic script. I'm going to click on copy here, and I'm going to go back to Unity, and I'm going to select this one and replace it with the code that I just copied. Now, what this code basically does is it checks when the script is started. This is how you check by doing function self awake. Again, I'm not going to go through in details because I don't want you to be bored. We are going to cover this later, but this is basically how to tell that the script is loaded. And this, whenever the script is loaded, is just going to print in the console, hello world. And then it's also going to listen to another function, which is update. It keeps updating every frame. So while the game is running, it's always going to update. What this is basically doing is it's taking the game object that's the script that's attached to and getting the transform for that object, specifically the position like I showed you before, if I go, for example, to Unity and I select this cube, you can see here that this cube has a transform. To access this transform, this is the way to do it, by checking the transform position. So what I'm doing here, to access the position, this is the way to do it, by calling the game object transform.position, and I'm going to say this game object position should be equal to the game object position that we have, but we are going to increase its position or its x value, okay, to make it go up, right? Or its y value to make it go up, or the z, it's really up to you. It depends on how the object is set up in your scene, whether it's a y, x, z, okay? Now if I go back to the editor and I find the cube that I want to change its position or make it do that thing, that effect, the floating effect. So for example, let's go with this cube, the one that we created in our previous lecture, and I want the script to be attached to this game object. The first thing I can do is I can scroll in the inspector and I can add component. I can search for my first script, and you can see here that it's showing in the components, and if I click on it, it will be added to the game object. Another way to do it, which is the easiest way, if I remove this component, I can just drag this script and put it in the inspector right here. That's also another way to do it. And there's one more way to do it. Oops, sorry. I'm going to remove the component again, and I'm going to drag this script and put it in the game object in the hierarchy, and it will also do the same thing. This is personal preferences, whatever you see fit or whatever you see easier for you to do. Now, like we said before, we want this object to float. That's the code that we wrote. It makes the object go up, okay? Now, to make the object go up, first thing, it must not be set to static. If it's set to static here, it makes the object static and it cannot be moved, okay? So you have to uncheck this one, and I'm going to say yes, change children, because I don't want any of the children, or, you know, since it's a nested object, I don't want them to be static. So I'm going to select yes, and now the object is not static and it can be moved, right? And like I said it before, the script that we wrote changed the y value, so whenever I start the game, it's going to start floating. But first, let's clear these up. So I'm going to just move them so I can spawn here, and I'm going to hit play. And you can see that the object is floating and it's never going to stop, because the script that we wrote is basically just telling the object that every frame that passes, it should just keep moving up and moving up. And if I go to the console, you can see here that says hello world, and this is my first script. That's because the script loaded, and when it loaded, what we did at first is we set a print hello world. Does that make sense now? Now that's it. That's all you need to understand for this lecture: how to create a script, how to attach the script to a game object, and what does functions do. Now, in the more advanced lecture, we are going to cover everything about scripts, so stay tuned for more videos. Now, in the next lecture, we're going to explain scenes, which is going to be part 5 of lecture 4.